The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the forward operating base in Afghanistan, casting long shadows across the dusty tarmac, where Sarah Martinez crouched beside the massive Apache helicopter. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she worked methodically on the aircraft's most feared weapon system, the M230 chain gun that had been jamming for 3 days straight. Sarah had been working as a civilian contractor for Lockheed Martin for 2 years now, specializing in weapon systems maintenance. Her expertise with the 30mm automatic cannon had made her invaluable to the military units stationed here. The pilots depended on her skills to keep their primary defensive weapon operational in this dangerous theater. The minigun's feed mechanism had been causing intermittent failures, and Sarah knew the lives of the aircrew depended on getting it fixed properly. She had already spent 6 hours yesterday tracing the problem through the complex ammunition feed system, checking each link in the belt-fed mechanism for wear or damage. Working in the cramped confines beneath the Apache's nose, Sarah's movements were precise and deliberate. She had learned long ago that hasty repairs in a combat zone could mean the difference between life and death for the men and women who flew these machines into harm's way. The metallic smell of gun oil and hydraulic fluid filled her nostrils as she carefully examined each component. The sound of approaching footsteps on the tarmac made her pause. Through the landing gear, she could see combat boots moving toward the aircraft. The pilot was early for the pre-flight inspection, but Sarah wasn't quite finished with her work. She needed another 20 minutes to complete the calibration sequence and run the final tests. Captain Jake Reynolds had been flying Apache helicopters for 8 years, with 3 combat deployments under his belt. He was known among the squadron for his methodical approach to maintenance checks and his insistence on understanding every detail of his aircraft's condition before taking it into the air. His reputation for bringing his crew home safely was built on this attention to detail. As Jake approached the helicopter, he could hear the sounds of someone working beneath the nose section. He had been told that the contractor from Lockheed was addressing the gun malfunction, but he hadn't met her yet. The other pilots had mentioned she was exceptionally skilled and had solved several complex problems that had stumped the regular maintenance crews. Sarah continued her work, unaware that the pilot was now standing just a few feet away. She had rolled up her sleeves in the heat, and her focus remained entirely on the delicate adjustment she was making to the ammunition feed mechanism. The tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch, and any mistake could result in a catastrophic failure during combat operations. The repair required her to partially disassemble the gun's loading system, a task that demanded both technical knowledge and physical dexterity. Sarah had performed this procedure dozens of times, but never under such challenging conditions. The desert heat made every tool burning hot to the touch, and the constant threat of mortar attacks meant she had to be ready to take cover at a moment's notice. Jake decided to introduce himself and get a status update on the repairs. He walked around to the nose section where the contractor was working, preparing to crouch down and discuss the timeline for completion. The mission briefing was scheduled for 1,400 hours, and he needed to know if his aircraft would be ready for the afternoon patrol. As Sarah reached for a specific wrench in her toolbox, she had to stretch her left arm fully, causing her sleeve to slide up past her elbow. The intricate tattoo that covered her upper forearm became clearly visible in the bright sunlight. The design was unmistakable to anyone familiar with military special operations, the distinctive trident and eagle that marked her as a former Navy SEAL. The tattoo told a story that few people knew. Sarah had served for 6 years in one of the most elite military units in the world before transitioning to civilian contractor work. The decision to leave active duty had been difficult, but a training accident had left her with a permanent injury that ended her operational career. Rather than accept a desk job, she had chosen to use her technical skills in the private sector. Jake's eyes immediately focused on the tattoo as he approached. His step faltered, and he stopped mid-stride, staring at the unexpected sight. In his 8 years of military service, he had never encountered a female Navy SEAL, though he knew the program had been open to women in recent years. The implications of what he was seeing sent his mind racing. The SEAL Trident represented the most grueling military training in existence, a program that had a failure rate exceeding 90%. The men and women who earned that symbol had proven themselves capable of extraordinary things under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Jake felt a mixture of respect, curiosity, and confusion as he processed this unexpected revelation. Sarah sensed someone's presence and glanced up from her work. Noticing the pilot standing nearby with an expression she couldn't quite read, she quickly pulled her sleeve back down. A reflexive action born from years of keeping her military background private in the contractor world. Many people had preconceived notions about special operations personnel, and she preferred to let her work speak for itself. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and assumptions. Jake's military bearing was evident in his posture and the way he carried himself, and Sarah recognized the look of someone trying to process unexpected information. She had seen that expression before when her past was revealed to people who thought they knew what to expect from a civilian contractor. Breaking the silence, Sarah cleared her throat and gestured toward the minigun mechanism. The professional part of her mind kicked in, focusing on the task at hand rather than the awkward moment of recognition. She had a job to complete, and the air crew's safety depended on her getting it right, regardless of what the pilot might think about her background. The desert wind picked up slightly, blowing dust across the tarmac and providing a momentary distraction from the tension in the air. Both Sarah and Jake seemed to realize simultaneously that they were letting their assumptions and curiosity interfere with the important work that needed to be done. The mission schedule wouldn't wait for personal revelations or explanations. Jake stood frozen for several seconds, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had seen with his expectations. The professional side of his brain told him to focus on the mission at hand, but he couldn't shake the image of that tattoo. He had worked alongside many elite military personnel throughout his career, but seeing a former SEAL working as a civilian contractor on his aircraft raised questions he hadn't anticipated. Sarah noticed the pilot's hesitation and decided to address the situation directly. She had learned over the years that ignoring the elephant in the room usually made things more uncomfortable for everyone involved. Setting down her tools, she wiped her hands on a rag and looked up at Jake with a steady gaze. "Captain Reynolds, I presume?" Sarah said, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. "I'm Sarah Martinez, Lockheed contractor. Your minigun should be operational within the hour, assuming no complications with the final calibration." Jake snapped back to the present, realizing he had been staring. His military training kicked in, and he straightened his posture before responding. "Yes, ma'am. I appreciate your work on this. The gun's been giving us trouble for 3 days, and my crew chief was starting to think we might need a complete replacement." The formality in Jake's voice was noticeable, a stark contrast to the casual way he usually interacted with civilian contractors. Sarah picked up on the change immediately, recognizing the careful distance that people often put between themselves and her once they learned about her background. She had hoped to avoid this particular complication. The problem was in the belt feed mechanism, Sarah explained, gesturing toward the disassembled components laid out on a clean cloth beside her toolkit. Metal fatigue caused a timing issue that was throwing off the entire firing sequence. "I've replaced 3 components and recalibrated the system. It should function normally now, but I want to run it through the full diagnostic before signing off." Jake nodded, impressed despite himself by her technical knowledge. Most contractors he had worked with could perform routine maintenance, but few understood the weapon systems well enough to diagnose complex mechanical failures. The way Sarah explained the problem showed a depth of understanding that went beyond basic training. As Sarah returned to her work, Jake found himself watching her movements with new interest. Her technique was methodical and precise, showing the kind of attention to detail that came from understanding the life or death importance of perfect execution. Every tool was returned to its exact place. Every component was handled with careful respect. "Mind if I ask how long you've been working on Apache systems?" Jake said, attempting to break the tension while satisfying his curiosity about her background. He crouched down beside the aircraft, positioning himself where he could observe her work without being intrusive. Sarah considered her response carefully. She had found that being completely honest about her background usually led to one of 2 reactions. Either people became overly deferential, or they challenged her qualifications. Neither response was particularly helpful in a professional environment. "About 2 years now," she replied, focusing on threading a bolt into place with precisely the right amount of torque. "Started with basic maintenance contracts, but the company discovered I had an aptitude for weapon systems. Turned out my previous experience translated well to civilian applications." The understatement was enormous, and both of them knew it. SEAL training included extensive weapons instruction that went far beyond what most military personnel ever received. Sarah's previous experience represented some of the most advanced tactical and technical training available anywhere in the world. Jake decided to probe a little deeper, his curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "Previous experience in the military?" he asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. The tattoo he had glimpsed left little doubt about her background, but he wanted to see how she would respond to direct questions. Sarah paused in her work, considering how much to reveal. She had learned that partial honesty often caused more problems than complete disclosure. People filled in the blanks with their own assumptions, which were usually more dramatic than the reality. "Navy," she said simply, returning her attention to the minigun mechanism. 6 years active duty before transitioning to contract work. Turns out the skills transfer pretty well to this type of maintenance. The casual way she mentioned her Navy service was clearly intended to minimize further discussion, but Jake's trained eye had already noted other details that supported his growing suspicion about her background. Her physical conditioning was evident even through her work clothes, and her situational awareness was remarkable. She had noticed his approach long before most people would have, and her body language suggested someone accustomed to potentially dangerous environments. "What rate were you in the Navy?" Jake pressed, using the military term for occupational specialty. He knew he was being pushy, but his curiosity had gotten the better of him. The idea that he might be working with a former SEAL was too intriguing to ignore. Sarah's hands stilled on her tools, and she looked up at Jake with an expression that mixed amusement with mild annoyance. She had been hoping to avoid this exact conversation, but the pilot seemed determined to pursue it. The direct approach might be the only way to move past his curiosity and get back to the work at hand. "Special warfare," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But that's not relevant to fixing your gun, Captain. What is relevant is that this repair needs to be completed before your afternoon mission, and I need to concentrate to make sure it's done right." The phrase "special warfare" hung in the air between them like a live wire. Jake knew exactly what that meant in Navy terminology, and it confirmed what the tattoo had already suggested. He was looking at someone who had completed some of the most demanding military training in existence. Someone who had operated at a level that most military personnel could barely imagine. Jake felt his perspective shift dramatically. The woman crouched beneath his aircraft wasn't just a skilled contractor, she was a warrior who had chosen to use her expertise in a different capacity. The respect he felt was immediate and profound, but it came mixed with a dozen questions he didn't know how to ask appropriately. Sarah could see the wheels turning in Jake's mind, and she recognized the look of someone trying to process information that didn't fit their preconceptions. She had seen that expression many times over the past 2 years, from fellow contractors who discovered her background to military personnel who couldn't reconcile her current role with her past service. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of gentle authority that Jake instinctively recognized. "I understand your curiosity, but I'd really like to get this weapon system back online for you. My job is to make sure you and your crew have the tools you need to complete your missions safely. Everything else is just background noise." The wisdom in her words was unmistakable, and Jake felt slightly embarrassed by his persistent questioning. Sarah was right. Her background was interesting, but what mattered right now was her ability to repair his aircraft. He had let his curiosity override his professional judgment, something he rarely allowed to happen. Jake stepped back, giving Sarah the space she needed to complete her work. The revelation about her background had shifted his entire perspective, but he recognized the wisdom in her request to focus on the immediate task. He had always prided himself on maintaining professional boundaries, and he wasn't about to compromise that standard now. "You're absolutely right," Jake said, his tone returning to the businesslike manner he used with all the maintenance personnel. "I'll get out of your way and let you finish. What's your estimated completion time?" Sarah appreciated his professional response and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Give me 45 minutes for the final calibration and testing sequence. I want to run through the complete diagnostic cycle to make sure everything is functioning within specifications." As Jake walked away to review his mission briefing materials, Sarah returned her full attention to the minigun mechanism. The interruption had reminded her why she usually kept her sleeves down and avoided discussions about her military service. People's reactions were rarely helpful, and they always seemed to complicate simple professional relationships. The calibration process required precise measurements and adjustments that demanded her complete focus. Sarah had developed her own systematic approach to weapons maintenance during her SEAL training, where attention to detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She applied that same level of rigor to her civilian work, even though the immediate stakes might seem lower. Working methodically through her checklist, Sarah tested each component of the ammunition feed system. The belt mechanism needed to move with perfect timing to ensure reliable operation during sustained fire. Even a fraction of a second delay could cause the entire system to jam, potentially leaving the aircrew defenseless during a critical moment. 20 minutes into the calibration process, Sarah heard footsteps approaching again. This time, she recognized Jake's gait from their earlier encounter. She continued working but acknowledged his presence with a quick glance up from her tools. "Sorry to interrupt again," Jake said, maintaining a respectful distance from her work area. "I wanted to mention that we're expecting some complex terrain on today's mission. Multiple elevation changes and some tight canyon work. I know it shouldn't affect your repair, but I thought you should know the gun might see heavy use." Sarah nodded, appreciating the additional context. "Thanks for the heads up. I'm actually going to run an extended stress test before I sign off on the repair. Better to discover any problems here on the ground than during your mission." The consideration she showed for the operational requirements impressed Jake. Most contractors completed their repairs according to the technical specifications and considered their job done. Sarah was thinking beyond the immediate fix to consider how the weapon would perform under actual combat conditions. "That's above and beyond what's required," Jake observed. "The technical manual probably calls for a standard function test." Sarah shrugged, not looking up from her work. "The technical manual wasn't written by someone who might depend on this weapon to get home alive. I'd rather spend an extra 20 minutes now than wonder later if I missed something important." The comment revealed more about Sarah's mindset than she probably intended. Jake realized that her approach to maintenance was still informed by the warrior mentality she had developed during her special operations service. She wasn't just fixing a piece of equipment, she was preparing a tool that might save lives. As Sarah began the stress testing sequence, the minigun cycled through its operation with smooth, mechanical precision. The rhythmic sounds of the ammunition feed mechanism echoed across the tarmac as she ran it through various firing patterns. Each cycle confirmed that her repairs had addressed the underlying problem. "Sounds good from here," Jake commented, listening to the consistent timing of the mechanical action. His experienced ear could detect irregularities that might not be apparent to someone less familiar with the weapon system. "It should," Sarah replied, making notes on her maintenance log. "I replaced the entire timing assembly, not just the worn components. Sometimes it's worth doing a complete overhaul, rather than patching individual problems." The thoroughness of her approach reinforced Jake's growing respect for her professional capabilities. Sarah had gone beyond the minimum requirements to ensure the weapon would function reliably under any conditions his mission might present. During a pause in the testing sequence, Jake found himself studying Sarah's working methods more closely. Her movements showed the kind of muscle memory that came from years of intensive training with weapons systems. Every action was economical and purposeful, with no wasted motion or uncertainty about the next step. "You know," Jake said carefully, "I've worked with a lot of contractors over the years, but your approach is different. More thorough than what I usually see." Sarah looked up from her work, considering how to respond. She had been hoping to avoid further discussion about her background, but Jake's observation was accurate. Her training had instilled habits that were difficult to hide, even in civilian work. "I've always believed that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right the first time," she said simply. "Cutting corners on weapons maintenance strikes me as a particularly bad idea." The understatement was typical of her reserved communication style, but Jake could read between the lines. Sarah's definition of doing things right had been shaped by experiences where mistakes could have fatal consequences. That perspective naturally carried over into her civilian work. As the testing sequence neared completion, Sarah began reassembling the exterior panels and securing the access covers. Her movements remained precise and methodical, with each component returned to its exact specifications. The professionalism she displayed was remarkable. But Jake was beginning to understand that it reflected much deeper training and experience. "Test complete," Sarah announced, making final entries in her maintenance log. "All systems functioning normally. The weapon is cleared for operational use." Jake approached to review her documentation, noting the detailed notes she had made about each aspect of the repair. Her paperwork was as thorough as her mechanical work, providing a complete record of what had been done and why. Future maintenance teams would be able to understand her repair process and build on her work. "This is excellent documentation," Jake said, genuinely impressed by the quality of her record-keeping. Most contractors provide the bare minimum for their reports. Sarah secured her tools in their designated places within her kit, maintaining the organized approach that had characterized her entire repair process. Good documentation protects everyone involved. If something goes wrong later, you'll know exactly what was done and when. The practical wisdom in her approach was evident, and Jake realized that Sarah's attention to detail extended far beyond the mechanical aspects of her work. She understood the importance of accountability and long-term maintenance planning in ways that reflected sophisticated professional training. As Sarah prepared to leave, Jake felt compelled to acknowledge the quality of her work more directly. Despite his curiosity about her background, he recognized that her professional capabilities spoke for themselves. The repair had been completed to standards that exceeded anything he had come to expect from civilian contractors. "Sarah," he said, causing her to pause and look back at him. "Thank you for the exceptional work on this repair. It's clear that you take this job seriously, and that means a lot to those of us who depend on this equipment." Sarah paused at Jake's words, recognizing the genuine appreciation in his voice. Throughout her years as a contractor, she had grown accustomed to being treated as just another vendor, providing a service. The fact that this pilot understood the deeper significance of her work meant more to her than she expected. "I appreciate that, Captain," she replied, her professional reserve softening slightly. "Your aircrew's safety is the most important consideration in everything I do. I may not be wearing a uniform anymore, but I still understand what's at stake." The admission revealed more about her motivations than Sarah usually shared with clients. Jake could hear the echo of military service in her words, the understanding that their work had consequences beyond simple technical specifications. It was the perspective of someone who had operated in environments where attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. As Sarah gathered her remaining tools, Jake wrestled with his curiosity about her transition from military service to civilian contracting. The questions he wanted to ask were personal, but her professionalism throughout their interaction had earned his respect. He decided that if she wanted to share more about her background, she would do so on her own terms. "If you don't mind me asking," Jake said carefully, "what brought you to contractor work? Most people with your background stay in government service or move into training roles." Sarah considered the question while securing the last of her equipment. She had been asked similar questions many times, and her standard response was usually brief and non-committal. Something about Jake's respectful approach made her inclined to provide a more complete answer. "Training accident during my 5th year," she said, unconsciously flexing her left shoulder. "Torn rotator cuff and nerve damage that ended my operational capability. The Navy offered desk assignments, but that wasn't what I signed up for. Civilian contracting lets me use my technical skills while staying close to the mission." The explanation was matter of fact, but Jake could imagine the difficulty of such a transition. For someone who had reached the pinnacle of military special operations, being forced into a support role would represent a fundamental change in identity and purpose. Sarah had found a way to remain connected to the military mission while adapting to her physical limitations. "That must have been a difficult adjustment," Jake said, recognizing the weight of what she had shared. "But it sounds like you found a way to make a significant contribution in your new role." Sarah appreciated his understanding response. Many people either expressed excessive sympathy for her injury or questioned why she would leave such an elite military position. Jake's comment acknowledged both the challenge of her transition and the value of her current work. "Every adjustment has its challenges," she replied. "But I've learned that there are many ways to serve. Keeping weapon systems operational for people like you is just a different type of mission." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of another helicopter approaching the landing area. Sarah automatically scanned the sky to identify the aircraft. Her situational awareness still finely tuned, despite her civilian status. Jake noticed her instinctive response and realized that some aspects of military training never really faded. "That's my wingman returning from the morning patrol," Jake explained, following her gaze to the approaching Apache. "We'll be flying together on this afternoon's mission." Sarah nodded, watching as the helicopter settled onto the tarmac with practiced precision. She could tell from the pilot's technique that this was an experienced crew. The kind of professionals who would appreciate having reliable equipment for their dangerous work. "Captain," Sarah said, returning her attention to Jake, "I want you to know that if you have any concerns about the repair during your mission, don't hesitate to abort and return to base. I'm confident in the work I've done, but your safety is more important than completing any single mission." The advice reflected Sarah's understanding of operational risk management, something that went beyond typical contractor responsibilities. She was thinking like a team member rather than just a service provider, considering the broader implications of her repair work. Jake was struck by her operational mindset and the genuine concern she showed for his welfare. Most contractors completed their assignments and moved on without considering how their work would perform under actual combat conditions. Sarah's continued investment in the mission's success revealed the depth of her military background. "I'll keep that in mind," Jake replied. "Though based on what I've seen of your work, I don't expect any problems. The thoroughness of your approach gives me confidence in the repair." As they concluded their conversation, both Sarah and Jake realized that their interaction had evolved beyond a simple contractor-client relationship. The mutual respect they had developed was based on their shared understanding of military service and the serious nature of their work. Sarah shouldered her toolkit and prepared to leave for her next assignment. The base maintenance schedule kept her busy throughout the day, with multiple aircraft requiring various levels of service. Each repair job demanded the same attention to detail she had brought to Jake's minigun, regardless of how routine the work might seem. "Good luck on your mission today," Sarah said, extending her hand for a professional handshake. "Fly safe and bring your crew home." Jake accepted her handshake, noting the firm grip that reflected both her confidence and her military background. "Thank you for everything you've done. It's been a pleasure working with a true professional." As Sarah walked away across the tarmac, Jake watched her departure with a new appreciation for the complexity of military transitions. She had found a way to continue serving despite the end of her operational career, adapting her skills to make a valuable contribution in a different capacity. The afternoon mission briefing was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and Jake needed to complete his pre-flight preparations. But first, he wanted to examine Sarah's repair work more closely, not because he doubted her capabilities, but because he was genuinely curious about her technical approach. Crouching beneath the Apache's nose, Jake could see the evidence of Sarah's methodical work. Every component had been properly secured, every connection had been made with precision, and the overall installation showed the kind of attention to detail that reflected years of advanced training. The quality of her work reinforced his growing respect for her professional capabilities. Jake realized that Sarah represented something relatively uncommon in the contracting world. Someone who brought elite military training to bear on civilian technical work. The combination of her specialized knowledge and her operational mindset made her an unusually valuable asset. As Jake stood up and began walking toward the operations building, he found himself hoping that their paths would cross again during his deployment. Working with someone who understood both the technical and operational aspects of their mission had been a refreshing change from typical contractor interactions. The afternoon mission would provide the ultimate test of Sarah's repair work, but Jake felt confident that she had addressed the weapon system's problems thoroughly. Her professional approach and obvious expertise had given him the kind of assurance that was invaluable before heading into a potentially dangerous situation. 6 hours later, Jake's Apache touched down on the forward operating base as the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, Sarah's repair work had performed flawlessly throughout the demanding flight. The minigun had cycled through multiple engagements without a single malfunction, proving the quality of her technical work under actual combat conditions. As Jake completed his post-flight procedures, he found himself thinking about his conversation with Sarah earlier that day. Her professional competence had been impressive, But what struck him most was her continued dedication to the mission despite no longer wearing a uniform. She had found a way to serve that honored her military training while adapting to her changed circumstances. The next morning, Jake sought out Sarah at the maintenance hangar, where she was working on another Apache's hydraulic system. He had spent considerable time thinking about their interaction and wanted to express his appreciation more fully for the quality of her work. "Sarah," he called out as he approached her work area. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah looked up from the hydraulic manifold she was examining, noting the relaxed expression on Jake's face. The mission must have gone well, and her repair work had apparently performed as expected. She felt the satisfaction that always came from knowing her efforts had contributed to a successful operation. "How did the mission go?" she asked, though Jake's demeanor had already suggested the answer. "Any issues with the gun system?" "Perfect performance throughout the entire flight," Jake replied with genuine enthusiasm. "We had 3 separate engagements, and the weapons cycled flawlessly every time. Your repair work was exactly what we needed." Sarah felt a surge of professional pride at the confirmation that her work had met the operational demands of actual combat. No amount of ground testing could fully replicate the stresses and conditions of real missions, so successful field performance was the ultimate validation of her technical approach. "I'm glad to hear it," she said, returning her attention to the hydraulic system. "That's what it's supposed to do when it's working properly." Jake appreciated her modest response, which was consistent with the understated professionalism she had displayed throughout their previous interaction. Sarah seemed more focused on the work itself than on receiving credit for her contributions. "I wanted to ask you something," Jake said, settling into a position where he could observe her work without interfering. "Would you be interested in briefing our maintenance crews on advanced weapons system troubleshooting? Your diagnostic approach yesterday was more sophisticated than what our people typically use." The proposal surprised Sarah, who paused in her work to consider the implications. Teaching military personnel was significantly different from simply performing contract maintenance, and it would require her to share knowledge that went beyond her usual scope of work. "What kind of briefing are you thinking about?" she asked, intrigued by the possibility of expanding her contribution to the unit's capabilities. Jake had been developing the idea since witnessing Sarah's methodical approach to the minigun repair. Her systematic diagnostic process and attention to detail could benefit the entire maintenance operation if it could be shared with the regular crews. "Nothing formal," he explained. "Maybe a couple of sessions where you walk our people through your troubleshooting methodology. Show them how to identify problems that might not be obvious, using standard procedures." The opportunity appealed to Sarah's desire to maximize her impact on mission readiness. Training others to use her techniques would multiply the effectiveness of her knowledge and potentially prevent future weapon malfunctions that could endanger aircrews. "I'd be willing to do that," she said, after considering the proposal. "When were you thinking of scheduling these sessions?" Jake felt pleased that Sarah had accepted his suggestion. He had sensed that she would be interested in any opportunity to contribute more substantially to the unit's operational capabilities. "How about we start next week?" he proposed. "I can arrange for the maintenance crews to attend during their normal training periods. Nothing that would interfere with your regular contract work." As they discussed the logistics of the training sessions, both Jake and Sarah realized that their professional relationship had evolved into something resembling a partnership. Their shared commitment to mission success and aircrew safety had created a foundation for ongoing collaboration. Over the following weeks, Sarah's training sessions became highly regarded among the maintenance personnel. Her ability to explain complex technical concepts in practical terms made her an effective instructor, while her operational background gave her teaching credibility that purely civilian contractors often lacked. The maintenance crews particularly appreciated Sarah's emphasis on thinking beyond the immediate repair, to consider how weapon systems would perform under combat stress. Her training helped them develop a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between technical specifications and operational requirements. Jake observed several of the training sessions and was impressed by Sarah's ability to adapt her teaching style to different skill levels among the maintenance personnel. She had a natural talent for identifying what each individual needed to know and presenting information in ways that made sense to them. The success of the training program led to additional requests for Sarah's expertise from other units on the base. Word spread about the contractor who brought special operations perspective to routine maintenance work, and demand for her services increased significantly. 3 months later, as Jake prepared for the end of his deployment, he reflected on how his chance encounter with Sarah had enriched his understanding of military service and transition. Her example had shown him that dedication to the mission could take many different forms, and that valuable contributions could come from unexpected sources. Their final conversation took place beside the same Apache where they had first met. Sarah was performing routine maintenance, while Jake completed his farewell visits to various personnel on the base. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've contributed to our operations," Jake said, watching Sarah work with the same methodical precision he had observed months earlier. "Your technical expertise and training programs have made a real difference in our maintenance capabilities." Sarah looked up from her work, acknowledging the compliment with a slight smile. "It's been my pleasure to work with your unit. You gave me the opportunity to contribute in ways that go beyond simple contract maintenance." The mutual respect they had developed over their months of collaboration was evident in their easy interaction. What had begun as a chance encounter between a pilot and a contractor had evolved into a professional partnership that benefited everyone involved. "I hope our paths cross again somewhere down the road," Jake said as he prepared to leave. "The military is smaller than people think, especially in aviation circles." Sarah nodded, understanding the sentiment. Military careers often involved unexpected reunions with people from previous assignments, and she had learned to appreciate the value of maintaining professional relationships across different contexts. As Jake walked away for the final time, Sarah returned her attention to the aircraft maintenance that would continue long after his departure. Her work would go on, contributing to mission success and aircrew safety through the technical expertise she had developed during her years of military service. The encounter had reminded both of them that military service could take many forms, and that the values learned in uniform could continue to guide contributions long after the formal service period ended. Sarah had found her way to continue serving, while Jake had gained a deeper appreciation for the diverse ways that military training could benefit ongoing operations. In the months that followed, Jake would often think about Sarah's example when he encountered other military personnel facing transitions or challenging career decisions. Her story had demonstrated that setbacks could be transformed into opportunities, and that dedication to the mission could find expression in many different roles and circumstances.